Hi everyone, my name is Ashka and welcome back to my channel. So on this channel, I produce video essays surrounding topics relevant to the Indian diaspora and Bollywood, and sometimes I will talk about American pop culture as well. So if any of that interests you, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. So this video is going to be part 2 to the last video that I put out, which was about colorism in India. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I'd highly recommend checking that out and then come back to this video, just because in this video we're going to be building on the concepts that were established in part 1. I'm particularly proud of that video essay. I did a lot of research, a lot of thought went into it, and it's been my longest video so far, so I'd really appreciate it if you could check it out and let me know your thoughts on it. So today we're going to be talking about colorism in Bollywood specifically. This video idea kind of came up for me when I was watching Sholay. Sholay, if you don't know, is one of the classic Indian films from the 70s. It's kind of a quintessential Bollywood film. I watched it for the first time maybe a year ago or a little bit less than a year ago, and I noticed that Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra, the two leads of the film, are, lighter skinned and they're the action heroes and whatever, and the villains are the opposite. All the villains were consistently dark skinned, and then the heroes were light-skinned, and I just thought that was interesting. And so that's kind of what got me thinking about this topic. And also just seeing Fair and Lovely commercials and knowing that certain actors, most of them, have endorsed a skin lightening cream. So just thinking about all that stuff, I initially started my research on this topic, colorism in Bollywood, and it kind of turned into a whole deep dive into the origin of colorism in India. So in part 1, we talk about the caste system, patriarchy, colonization, religion. So we really get into the root of colorism in India. And so today we're going to be talking about how that all kind of plays out in Bollywood. Guys, you won't believe this. I literally just got the hiccups as I started filming. So, there we go. So hopefully we don't have too many interruptions, but if there's a bunch of cuts, just know that I'm hiccuping. I'm hiccuping, as you can see. So as I said in part 1, the population of India is very diverse, with a lot of different phenotypes being presented, and yet the image that you see on screen of Indian people is pretty similar, which is a light-skinned individual with European features. And this isn't just in Bollywood films, it's also in TV shows, commercials, billboards. These all reinforce the ideas that whiteness is the norm or the epitome of beauty. So there's a little bit of history behind this as to why these representations exist on the screen even today. So to quote Monica Sarkar for CNN Style, Bollywood and Indian cinema generally had two remarkable antecedents: religious iconography and Parsi theater. For both, whiteness was essential. Before Hindi sound films were established in 1931, Parsi theater, influenced by colonial English theater, served as entertainment for the growing middle and working classes and was hugely popular. So there's certainly this European influence and Parsi influence as well, and Parsi folks are generally lighter skinned individuals. It's interesting because I actually wrote a paper in college about Indian cinema before and after the partition. And I was talking about how there was kind of a rise in more patriotic cinema during the 40s and 50s. Something that I did notice is this rise of films about the Western world in Bollywood that started in the 1990s. And this makes sense because it coincided with the tech boom, the rise of computers, and therefore a wave of Indian immigrants coming to the US, to the UK, and other Western countries. So some examples of this are DDLJ, where they take a trip to Switzerland, Galhonaho, where the whole movie takes place in New York. So there was kind of a rise of people exploring the Western world and entire films taking place in the Western world. So to quote Rebecca Peters, yes, we're quoting her again, liberalization of the Indian economy in the 1990s created a rise in Indian middle and upper middle class. This upper middle class embodies Western ideas of success and wealth, creating gated neighborhoods, consumerism with vast shopping malls, and a reflection of their ideals and lifestyle in Bollywood films. So something that I came across in my research that I thought was interesting is this idea that there is a certain type of person who should be allowed to immigrate to the US. To quote Sakshi Venkatraman for NBC News, the intersection of race and whiteness were factors for South Asians who tried to immigrate to the US before the Immigration Act of 1965. Indians fighting to gain entrance argued in court that they should be considered white for the purposes of immigration and that their status as high caste Hindus should count too. After the act passed, it became easier for highly educated South Asians to immigrate to the US. So obviously, if you're highly educated, there's a certain privilege associated with that, probably means you are in a higher caste. And as I said in my last video, there is an association between skin color and caste. And so the types of Indians you might see immigrating, at least during this time, were probably reflective of the types of people we were seeing in these Bollywood films as well. So how do filmmakers constantly justify casting light-skinned actors in various roles? Of course, they'll say that the audience wants a well-known star to be at the forefront of the film, and that's why they're casting big-known stars who just happen to also be light-skinned. And of course, that connects to nepotism, which I made a whole video about nepotism in Bollywood. I'll link that below. But we have these kind of family trees of actors who are light-skinned, and oftentimes they will marry other actors who are also light-skinned and have children who are light-skinned, and so the system kind of reinforces itself in that way. So to quote Rebecca Peters, "The current system profits when fulfilling normative expectations. Light-skinned, known male lead, and equally or more light-skinned, young, known female love interest or counterpart. But people will always want to see themselves on screen." So, of course, there's this desire to see yourself on the screen, see somebody that looks like you. And representation is so important in that way, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the video. So in my research, I came across this video from Vice News, and the video is called "Why India's Fair Skin Business is Booming." So in the video, the interviewer talks to a casting director, Sohail Siddiqui, and he basically tells her that the reason he casts light-skinned actors in most of his roles is because that's what his clients are asking for. So a client could be like a producer or a studio, and they're specifically asking for lighter-skinned individuals. And that's kind of his excuse for why he doesn't even see darker-skinned aspiring actors. They also went to a TV set for an Indian TV show in the video, and the two leads were very, very light-skinned, and the crew and, the extras, things like that, were darker skinned. And so I thought that was really interesting. They also started the video by going to like a photo shoot for Indian traditional clothes. And the models that were there, I didn't even know this, the models that were there were not even Indian. They were from the Ukraine. And the difference was very stark in terms of like the makeup artists and the photographers and all of that were very dark skinned and they were Indian, compared to these very fair Ukrainian women who are modeling these traditional clothes. So that's what I mean by, representation also matters in like billboards and things you see outside and things you see in magazines. Like these things also matter just as much as like the mainstream cinema that we're exposed to. We see this in Bollywood as well. We see like a lot of foreign actresses being cast as leads simply because they have that look, even if they don't really know Hindi very well. And then we also see in a lot of Bollywood songs, the background dancers are European. They're not Indian, and it's pretty obvious. Even if the whole film is taking place in India, the background dancers will be European. That happened in Om Shanti Om, and I'll find some other examples and I'll post pictures of that, but that's certainly very common as well. So not only do we see colorism come out through the casting, but we also see it coming out within the content of the films as well. So to quote an article from the University of Austin, Hindi film songs often perpetuate colorism explicitly or implicitly through references to the fair skin-toned, the dark skin toned who is nonetheless endearing, and a multitude of euphemisms for a lighter, fair skin toned person. So I'll give a couple of examples. The first example of a song is the song Gori Gori from Mehuna. That's pretty obvious. Gori means fair, it means light skinned. That's the feminine version, and then Gora means it's the male version of that. But Gori especially is synonymous with beautiful. So you'll often see, like, if they say Gori in a song, the subtitles will say beautiful, not fair-skinned woman, right? But in this song, Gori Gori, both the men and the women are referencing each other as Gori 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 Gori. So they're basically, saying that this person is attractive, but they're using their skin tone as, I guess, the reason why they're attractive. So the word is synonymous with beautiful or handsome. The other example in this article was from DDLJ, the song Mendi Laga Ke Rakhna, where they have the word Gori again. This is a little less obvious, but they're just kind of addressing the woman as Gori. And again, Gori meaning beautiful, when in reality, literally the word means like fair-skinned woman. But in the song, in the context of the song, you're not calling her that, you're calling her like beautiful, basically. So I'm sure there's lots of other examples of that. These are the two that I knew about. But let me know in the comments if there's any other songs that come to mind for you. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, a lot of the time the hero in a film will be light-skinned, conventionally attractive, and the villain will be the opposite, dark-skinned. Not just the villain, but somebody that comes from a poor background. They will cast dark-skinned actors for those parts, and they will cast light-skinned actors as the hero. So to quote Rebecca Peters, when Bollywood not only provides only extremely light-skinned actors as the heroes and heroines, but also casts darker-skinned actors as villains, seducers, and scoundrels, messages about color and value get transmitted to all who view these films. Films stereotype lower caste groups as darker-skinned, uneducated, and often foolish, creating associations between skin tone and caste as well as class. So an example of this is the movie Chennai Express. I haven't seen Chennai Express, but I did watch this clip. Essentially, they're on a train. Shah Rukh Khan and Deepika Padukone are the stars. And Deepika Padukone is playing a woman from Tamil Nadu, which is in South India, where people are generally darker skinned, but I'll post a photo of her. She's pretty light-skinned, very light-skinned, I would say. And yet the actors who play her cousins, who are portrayed as villains, buffoons, and mobsters, have a very dark skin tone. And we also see this in Sholay, like I said. All the bad guys, the murderers, they're dark-skinned, and the heroes are light-skinned. So again, there's probably a ton of other examples, but these are the ones that I came across. So seeing these types of representations on screen reinforces this internalized colorism that we all have. And I talked about this in part 1, where I shared anecdotes from people who admitted to their bias, admitted that, when I see a dark-skinned person on public transit, I think that they're unhygienic or that they're poor simply because of the color of their skin. And so I think seeing all of this constantly being played out on our screens definitely contributes to the ideology that we've internalized. We've internalized this bias that light-skinned people are morally and intellectually superior to dark-skinned people. So I just talked about the rise of movies being made about the Western world and Indians living in the Western world in the 90s and the 2000s. But I think the pendulum has swung back the other way, because I think in the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen a rise in biopics as well as films being made about social issues in India. So there's more of a focus now on India as a country and as a society. Some examples of biopics are Three Idiots, Mary Kom, Bhag Milka Bhag, Nirja, and Super 30, to name a few. So on the one hand, it's great that these stories are being told about people who are often very heroic in their acts, but the problem kind of comes about when the person being cast to play the real life person does not look anything like that person. So, for example, in Three Idiots, Amir Khan's character Rancho is actually based on a real person. So, to quote Rebecca Peters, Amir Khan's character Rancho in Three Idiots is inspired by the Ladakhi engineer and educational reform activist Sonar Wangchuk. Not only is the character played by an upper caste, light-skinned Amir Khan, but Rancho's family and culture are barely mentioned. And then the other example that she gives is the film Mary Kom, which stars Priyanka Chopra. So to read from the article again, Mary Kom is a Manipur tribal boxer who has won numerous prestigious national awards, including the World Amateur Boxing Championship. While the film Mary Kom received numerous awards for its portrayal of a strong woman, nevertheless, it glosses over her tribal heritage. In the 122 minutes long movie, they wiped clean almost all the overt references to her tribal identity, barring 2 scenes which barely lasted a couple of minutes. They implicitly hinted about her tribal roots in the northeastern state of Manipur. Her being portrayed by Priyanka Chopra, instead of providing a diversity of Indian features and people, only one type of Indian is considered acceptable, that which closely aligns with Aryan white features. So I think if we're going to pay homage to, like I said, these very heroic and inspirational people, we should at least take the time to acknowledge their cultural heritage, because one's cultural heritage very often shapes who they become in the present day. And so I do think it's a little bit of a disservice, but at the same time, you could argue that, this person's story is getting more exposure because a big star is attached to the film. So it's kind of an interesting situation where we do want to shed light on these people, but at the same time, we want to make sure the representation is as accurate as possible. So that leads us to our next topic, which is films about social issues in Bollywood. And I've seen a rise of this again in the last, I would say, 10 years or so. There's been films talking about certain issues within India. One example that I don't have in my notes is actually the movie Donkey, which stars Shah Rukh Khan. And that's a story about Indian immigration and how difficult it can be to immigrate and the circumstances people flee in order to immigrate and find a better life for themselves in the US. It's about illegal immigration, and it's a powerful message, especially when I saw the photos of real life people that have immigrated that they showed at the end of the film. But again, you have Shah Rukh Khan and other lighter skin actors playing these roles. So it's just interesting. But to quote Rebecca Peters, Amir Khan, Ayushmann Khurrana, and Akshay Kumar regularly make films that deal with issues of poverty, discrimination, and gender. All 3 of these superstar actors have played characters whose roles should have gone to a darker actor, either because of the biographical nature of the work or the region in which the story takes place. So some examples that she cites for Amir Khan are Dangal, Three Idiots. I added Lagan. Lagan is is one of those classic movies as well. I added that to the list because he plays a farmer in that film, and as we talked about in part 1, farmers were often, darker skinned. And another film she gives is Peeply Live. For Ayushmann Khurrana, she gives the examples Vicky Donor, Dam Laga Ke Aisha, and Shubh Mangal. And for Akshay Kumar, Ek Prem Katha, Padman, and Mission Mangal. So in general, I do think that these roles that they play, or any role in the film, could be given to a darker skinned actor. But again, you can make the argument that, hey, more light is being shed on these issues. For example, Padman, which is about the lack of menstrual products in rural India. That's a huge progressive topic. And if they had cast a completely unknown person, it might not have gotten the exposure that it did. And so again, it's a little bit of a toss-up here. I'm personally okay with it to an extent, as long as you're not doing brownface, which we'll talk about in a bit. I think it's okay just to get exposure. But these men could also serve as producers, which Amir Khan has done, serve as a producer without starring in the film. And that would be a good way to be involved and kind of have that big star name attached to it without having that big star, or have the big star make a cameo, somewhere in the film. So to quote Rebecca Peters again, "The promotion of social responsibility is one of the many ways that the industry appeals to the young urban and diasporic Indian audience. However, part of this gentrification of Bollywood includes removing signs of poverty, crime, and social injustice from the films. To satisfy the new target audience, when a film does address issues, it is sanitized in order to maintain its popularity." Yeah, so there's this sense of, yes, we're getting some exposure to these social issues, but we're kind of sanitizing them. We're not getting into the nitty-gritty or the dark nature of the issue. Or we're talking about a micro example of the issue rather than a macro example of it. And again, it's up to you to decide what your opinion is on it. For me, I think we're getting that representation a little bit and we're getting exposure. And if something is done alongside that, like in Padman, I don't know if they did this, but if they donated a bunch of menstrual products or they set up a system where they could provide those menstrual products, that would be awesome because that's actually making change through cinema. Something like that might help the situation a little bit, but I don't necessarily think this is wrong. And in my final thoughts, I'll talk more about what I think can be done in the future, but for now, this is okay. But something else that contributes to the sanitization of these issues is the involvement of the Indian government in cinema. So in the US, the government is not involved in the types of films that are being produced, but in India, the government is involved. So to quote Rebecca Peters, "These social issue films often coincide with goals of the government, often including nationalistic Hindu discourse as part of the narrative. In this way, the associations of Hinduism, class, caste, and color reify the implicit bias of an upper caste as urban and light-skinned within these social films, even when addressing issues of the poor and the lower caste. Part of the erasure that we're seeing is through the casting in these films, because we're not seeing somebody that looks like someone from that group or is from that group and is now an actor. But as I mentioned in the last part, it's very hard for those types of people to even become an actor because the studios and the producers are only asking for light-skinned actors. So that's definitely a chicken and egg kind of problem. So as I mentioned, I'm okay with Akshay Kumar starring in a film about a social issue in India. What I'm not okay with is brownface. And brownface has been done in Bollywood very, very often for decades. So just to give you some examples, Sunil Dutt in Mother India, Alia Bhatt in Uttar Punjab, Hrithik Roshan in Agnipath, Super 30, and Mohenjo-Daro, Varun Dhawan in Coolie No. 1, Bhumi Padnekar in Bala, Ileana De Cruz in Tera Kya Hoga Lovely. So that last example that I gave is a movie that was made in 2024. The title basically is Tera Kya Hoga Lovely, what's it to you to call me lovely, right? That's kind of what the title translates to, and it's directly referencing Fair and Lovely, which is the most popular skin lightening cream. So this movie is about a woman who cannot find a husband because of her dark skin. A journalist named Amrit Dhillon interviewed the director of this film, and this is what he had to say. "Society discriminates against dark-skinned people in the film industry, in jobs, in promotions, in modeling and advertising. But if the discrimination comes from the family, such as when parents unthinkingly call a dark-skinned child by disparaging nicknames, the damage is even greater. Meant to be a haven of unconditional love, the family becomes a site of betrayal." So this is very interesting because those are bars. He's speaking the truth, and yet he's casting a lighter skinned actress and putting her in brownface for this film that is talking about discrimination against dark-skinned individuals. The irony is apparent. Another example that came up a lot in my research is the movie Bala. So to quote Rebecca Peters, "Khurana's Bala, which deals with male pattern baldness, has a secondary storyline about color and discrimination. However, instead of casting a darker actress in the role, they cast Bhumi Pednekar and darkened her skin. Despite arguing within the film that women should not be discriminated against for their darker skin, the filmmakers discriminated against a dark-skinned actress. Now, how could they possibly justify the use of brownface? Because if this was done, well, it is done in the US, and historically it has been done. Yellowface, blackface, brownface, it's all been done in the US as well. But it really would not fly as much as it does in this case. So how do they justify it? Well, kind of how they justified the other stuff. This is what the audience wants. This is the actor that is best suited for the role. The actress, Bhumi Pednekar, in an interview, she said, if a filmmaker has taken me, it's because I add some value to the film. And the director of Bala, Amir Kaushik, said he thought about casting a dark-skinned actor, but felt Bhumi was superb for this character. So again, we have this argument of, oh, well, they're well-known, or, oh, they were just the best actor for the role. They just so happen to be light-skinned, but they play this character so well, which is interesting because if you're making a film literally about discrimination for having dark skin, I don't think a light-skinned person can relate to that at all. But a darker-skinned person definitely can bring real-life experiences to the performance, so it's a weird justification. So to quote Rebecca Peters again, Bollywood producers can claim that their storylines include diverse characters and themes without actually providing diverse representation. And she gives examples of Urta Punjab, Gully Boy, and Super 30. So it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, the sanitization of certain issues, and this is taken to a whole other level by casting a light-skinned person and putting them in brownface. I find it completely unacceptable. To quote Tanushi Bhatnagar for Rolling Stone India, employing light-skinned actors to play dark-skinned characters reinforces negative stereotypes because of the character's treatment in the film. Inherent presumptions attached to darker skin perpetuate the negative connotation of belonging to a backward class or having a disadvantage. So something I find interesting too is that these films and these characters that they are playing, it's a big star playing this character. So this big star is playing a hero, right? These characters are inspirational, they're aspirational, they're heroic in their own right, or they're like a villain, but they're like kind of cool. So there's like this coolness factor to these characters. And it kind of plays into this idea that like grittiness and edge is cool. It reminds me of cultural appropriation. So in the way that, Black culture and in the US Indian culture as well is heavily appropriated, where you're kind of picking and choosing parts of the culture that you want to take inspiration from or you want to adapt or incorporate into your own life. And you can do that without also being oppressed. So basically you can role play these characters without actually being oppressed or discriminated against if you actually looked like that person. I hope that makes sense, but it just gave me similar vibes to cultural appropriation. So in Monica Sarkar's article, she interviews a sociologist named Sanjay Srivastava, and so I'm going to read a quote from him. Colorism is not problematized at all, since a vast number of Bollywood cinema relies upon prejudice as a vehicle for entertainment. It would be considered perfectly natural that they would don brownface to portray a dark character, because audiences also like to be assured that the glamour is still there behind the mask. And that's what I mean by the cultural appropriation of it all. They can still see this glamorized version of the character on screen, and that certainly also sanitizes the issue that they might be trying to portray or the story that they're trying to tell. Because again, you're taking away that character's cultural context by having someone who's not only in brownface, but also has more European, conventionally attractive features. And so it definitely contributes to the glamorizing of those social issues as well. Okay, so we're going to pivot a little bit to Fair and Lovely commercials because this was, like I said, kind of the initial inspiration for this video. So I watched a ton of Fair and Lovely commercials, and pretty much everyone that I watched had a similar narrative. Oftentimes women, there were commercials for men as well, but for the most part, it was a woman who was kind of down on her luck, either with marriage or career aspirations. Her dreams cannot come true. And then her friend or her dad or someone gives her Fair and Lovely. And then she takes it. They always have the kind of anamorphic, like the progression of the product, like she's dark and then she's white and she's light skinned. And then it cuts to all her dreams coming true. She gets the career of her dreams. She gets the man of her dreams, whatever. It's very clear that they cast like light skinned individuals to play these characters. So they're not actually using the cream. They just put the actor in brown face. And then that progression that they show is just them going back to their original skin tone. So there's this idea that being light-skinned is associated with beauty and success. And this idea is reinforced when Bollywood stars endorse these skin lightening products. So just a quick list of celebrities. This isn't even close to complete, but a list of Bollywood actors who have endorsed skin lightening creams. Shah Rukh Khan. Yes. Shah Rukh King Khan. I made a whole video about Shah Rukh Khan and the evolution of his career, but yes, he has betrayed me multiple times in real life with his actions. John Abraham, Priyanka Chopra, Saif Ali Khan, Sonam Kapoor, and many, many more. So to quote the article from the University of Austin, not so subtle skin lightening products normalize colorism through marketing strategies that employ Bollywood stars in their advertising campaigns to send a loud and clear message that you need to be fair in order to be successful, both personally and professionally. So there's a little bit of good news, I guess. In 2014, the Advertising Standard Council of India actually banned the use of this narrative that I just spoke about, which is, when you're dark-skinned, you're down on your luck, and then you're light-skinned and everything changes. They cannot show dark-skinned people as depressed or disadvantaged. Another form of progress that has been made is the rebranding of Fair and Lovely. It is no longer called Fair and Lovely. In 2020, it was rebranded to Glow and Lovely. The reason for this is because of intense backlash that came about as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States as well as around the world. People started to see the irony. Particularly, Priyanka Chopra is posting, supporting Black Lives Matter while she herself has been in multiple skin lightening cream commercials. So people had really been recognizing the issue and the problem with the name Fair and Lovely and of course with the product itself. And so they have completely rebranded as Glow and Lovely. And their advertising, I did check out some of their more recent advertisements. They are not nearly as overt or explicit as what I described in the other commercials that I had seen. We have some progress, but is it too little too late? Because there are already a lot of repercussions to everything that has been done. And I talked about the repercussions, like I said, in part 1 of how colorism affects people in their day-to-day lives. But let's narrow it down to Bollywood a little bit more. So, to quote Rebecca Peters, contemporary Bollywood creates an idealized status quo of an upper middle class, light-skinned, upper caste family in order to appeal to the upper middle class Indian and diaspora ideas of themselves. This standard of color and caste becomes reinscribed in the minds of those who watch the films, furthering their belief in their own associations of caste, class, and color. So this is what I talked about earlier in reference to the internalized colorism that people have, but this can be extended beyond colorism because, like I said in part 1, you can't talk about colorism without also talking about caste and colonization and the patriarchy and all the things. But this doesn't just affect people in India. So to quote Rebecca Peters again, people across the world, especially in South Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean, regularly watch Bollywood films. They look to Bollywood for trend-setting, fashion choices, hairstyles, and for information about what constitutes beauty. I've talked about this in my nepotism video as well. So the idea that people outside of India who watch these films are going to think that this is what all Indian people look like. And in the same way, when you have the dark-skinned individuals being portrayed as villains, buffoons, seductors, what have you, it reinforces that idea in other people's minds as well. So even people outside of the country will have this negative association with darker skinned Indians And we've actually seen kind of a rise of like discrimination against Indians in the United States. Maybe I could make a whole video on that, although that would be pretty depressing. So to go back to that video that I saw from Vice News, at the end of the video, the interviewer goes to a dermatologist's office, and the dermatologist is doing what he calls the brown doll treatment on a client, where essentially he's shooting lasers at her skin to temporarily, he says, destroy the pigment in her skin. And so the interviewer asks the woman why she is doing this. And the woman said, she had been applying to jobs or receptionist jobs, and she had been turned away just because of her appearance. And she said that since she's in a customer-facing role, they want somebody with a certain look. And so she thinks if she gets this treatment done, she'll have better chances of finding a job. Even though she's qualified to work, they are not giving her the job simply because of the color of her skin. So obviously this has real life repercussions. Again, I get more into this in part 1. Everything is connected, right? The representation we see on screen is connected to how we see ourselves and how other people see us as well. So I want to end this section with a quote again from the sociologist Sanjay Srivastava. "There are no standards of beauty linked to dark skin. There is no vocabulary within Bollywood to discuss race at all, because in broader society, no such vocabulary or context has been allowed to develop." So this quote is basically saying that there's no discourse around anti-colorism or even about colorism in general because it's so deeply ingrained into Indian society and the Indian psyche. But here we are talking about it. And certainly in the last couple of years, there's been more and more awareness being spread about these issues and calling out filmmakers, calling out actors for their past and present actions. And so I want to end this video by shouting out this organization called Dark is Beautiful. This organization was founded in 2009, and to quote from their website, "The campaign exists to challenge the belief that the value and beauty of people in India and worldwide is determined by the fairness of their skin. Through conducting workshops and events, the project has reached out to people from all walks of life with the message, a person's self-worth does not depend on the color of their skin." So this is an awesome initiative. I'm going to link their website in the description. And to celebrate their 10-year anniversary in 2019, they actually released a music video called India's Got Color, and it's a super well-produced video. They essentially highlight, things that people say about either maintaining a fair complexion or, getting to a fair complexion and kind of the discrimination that takes place. They call all of that out, and then they basically say that, I know you look at me and you see my color and you judge me, but my color is beautiful, and so is every other color. And so I would highly recommend you checking out that video. It's really well made. So clearly there's awareness being spread. Clearly there's even changes being made with the rebrand of Fair and Lovely, for example, and hopefully we'll continue to see that trajectory. So to end with my final thoughts, I did mention several times in this video that, it's good for certain social issues or certain stories about real life people to get exposure when a huge star is being cast in the role. But the issue that I have, which I talked about in my nepotism video as well, is that people who do not fit this very specific mold of a Bollywood star often do not get the chance to rise in the ranks, right? So if we don't have someone from Manipur, for example, if we don't have anybody like that who is an A-list or B-list or even C-list celebrity, how are we going to cast Mary Com and expect people to show up to the theater, right? So I think it's a balance. I think there should be diverse representation across the board, not just in a biopic or in films being made about social issues, but in a romantic film. Cast someone who's darker skinned, cast someone who's in a bigger, larger body, cast someone who might not be as conventionally attractive with European features like the other actors are. Start in small roles, as most actors do, and build your way up. And directors, producers, studios should give those opportunities to those diverse people, because I guarantee it, there are people all around the country and around the world who would love to be an actor and would love to be in Bollywood films, but they probably know that there's no space for them. And so creating those spaces, I think, is what's the most important here. Again, is it wishful thinking? Maybe. Hopefully we'll get there one day, but that's going to be it for me for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!